Welcome back, class. It's Dr. Lindner. In this next video, we're going to be looking at the structural and functional classification of neurons. Now, when we look at the functional classification of neurons, we can refer to a neuron as being a sensory neuron, a motor neuron, or an interneuron. In one of my earlier videos, I remember drawing out like the brain and the spinal cord, and there's nerves that come out, right? We got 31 pairs of spinal nerves. Now, when we have information that comes in to the nerves, into the spinal cord, and up to the brain, that's the sensory information. That's afferent information, and that ascends. It goes up. And then the brain processes that information that starts in the brain, goes down the spinal cord, and goes out, maybe to a muscle, maybe to an organ, maybe to a gland. Well, that's motor information, which is efferent information, and that information descends. Now, there has to be a connection between the sensory and the motor because something's got to relay. What's the relay band that relays this information to this side? Well, that's our good friend, the interneuron or the association neuron, and that makes up about 90% of the neurons in the body. Okay, so let's look at this functionally. In a previous video, I tried to draw out a cross section of the spinal cord, and then I drew a neuron here, and I drew a letter H in the middle, or the butterfly in the middle. Now, the butterfly that we see in the middle is not myelinated, it's unmyelinated. And everything around this is myelinated. So myelin appears white. So this, everything around it is white matter. All of this stuff is white matter. Everything around the butterfly is white matter. The butterfly or the letter H in the middle, that's gray matter. Gray matter is not myelinated. Okay? Gray matter is not myelinated. Now, when you read on in your readings, you'll learn about tracts. And tracts are sensory and motor tracts. Sensory and motor, just think of that as either the up elevator or a down elevator. Tracts move up and down the spinal cord. Sensory tracts go up, motor tracts go down. All of the tracts exist in the white matter, where it's myelinated. Now, if I were to draw this line going across this way, everything from here back is dorsal, and everything from here back is ventral. This is dorsal, back dorsal, or posterior. Okay, and the way I know that, there's a trick. There's a way I know this. How do you know the difference between dorsal and ventral when you're looking at a cross section? The trick is look at the neurons. Look at the neuron going in and look at the neuron going out. Only one of them has this swollen part of the neuron. See, this is all pretty symmetrical. It's all kind of thin, but this has this fat dilated part. And that's because of this structure right here. That swollen part is called a ganglia. And a ganglia is just a group of nerve cell bodies that are clustered in the peripheral neural system. That's all a ganglia is. It's a group of nerve cell bodies that are clustered outside of the central neural system in the peripheral neural system. And because this is in the back or on the dorsal side, and this is a nerve root, this is called a dorsal root ganglia. This is a dorsal nerve root. This is a ventral nerve root. The dorsal nerve root carries sensory information. The motor nerve root, right here, this is a ventral nerve root. Ventral neuron or ventral nerve root. This is a dorsal nerve root. So this is a dorsal nerve root. This is a ventral nerve root. What type of information does a dorsal nerve root carry? Well, there's a pin or a nail. It's hitting the skin. There's the epidermis. Here's the dermis. You got pain receptors. So maybe this is on the finger. So the sensory neuron, the dorsal nerve root, is carrying sensory information into the spinal cord. Now, when you look at the gray matter, these parts of the gray matter are called horns. This is a dorsal horn. This is a dorsal horn. So what would these horns be called? Because they're in the front, these would be ventral horns. And this would be a ventral horn. So you got dorsal horns and ventral horns. That's the gray matter. Where does the sensory information come in and synapse? On the dorsal horn. Where does the motor information begin? The motor information begins on the ventral horn. The motor information begins on the ventral horn, goes down through the ventral root, out to the muscle to make it contract. The ventral nerve root is motor. Sensory nerve root, that's dorsal. Dorsal is sensory. Ventral is motor. There are viruses that attack the ventral horn. One of the viruses that likes to attack the ventral horn is called polio. Polio is a virus that attacks the ventral horn, and when that virus attacks it and destroys the ventral horn cells, you end up getting paralysis of muscles. Okay, so when we go back, we know the sensory neuron, we know the motor neuron. Where's the interneuron? That interneuron is what relays right in here. Let's see if I could change the color for you. I know there's a lot here. We'll make this blue. So going in this direction, connecting here from the sensory to the motor, the relay man, that is the interneuron, aka association neuron. Okay, so let's clear this slide up. And just review. So here's the receptors, pain receptors. The sensory information goes up the dorsal nerve root, goes through the dorsal root ganglia, comes in right to the dorsal horn, synapses, relays the information to the interneuron, which relays the information to the anterior horn, gray matter, anterior horn, gray matter, to this motor neuron, which is the ventral nerve root, carrying motor information to the muscle to make it contract. The letter H in the middle is gray matter, not myelinated. Everything around it is white matter. Okay, in fact, here on this back side, right in here. These are called the dorsal columns or posterior columns. And this is what allows you to feel the sensation of vibration. Like when you walk and your calcaneus hits the ground, it sends information that your foot landed from the vibration through the osteology into the neural system. This posterior columns in here in the white matter deals with your proprioceptive awareness, telling your body where you are in space and time. It deals with vibration. It deals with putting something in your hand and telling whether what's in your left hand or right hand is heavier or lighter. It's called baroagnosis, being able to tell what's heavier and lighter. Putting out your hand or having someone draw a number or letter on your back, or drawing a letter on your palm without looking. All of that information comes in to the posterior columns. When people have syphilis, syphilis attacks the posterior columns. Okay. All right, so that was the functional classification. Now let's look at the structural classification. The structural classification of neurons can be unipolar, bipolar, or multipolar. So the one that we've been talking about and focusing on when we talk about the neuron looks like the multipolar, which is several dendrites, which we see. You got several dendrites. You have one main axon coming off the cell body. So that's multipolar. Bipolar, which is here, this is where we have one main dendrite. So here's the cell body. We see we have one main dendrite coming off the cell body and one main axon. So that's called bipolar. These are found with your special senses, like it's found in the eye, it's found in the ear, your sense of smell, right? The olfactory sense. Now, look at this. What would happen if we took this and we pinched it off this way? If we were able to pull this and pinch it away, you get something that looks like this off to the right. If we pinch off the cell body over here, now we have a unipolar neuron, where it's one process that develops only. Now, if we were to move this instead of vertically, if we looked at it horizontally, you'd look at something that looks like this, which is this. It's a ganglion, right? So it's always in the sensory neuron, and the classical example of a unipolar neuron is in the dorsal root ganglia. Okay, always sensory. All right, let's take a look. What is this? Multipolar neuron. There's the cell body, lots of dendrites, an axon. That's a multipolar neuron. Right, but look at the distractors. You know, maybe they'll ask bipolar. Maybe they'll ask, oh, look at that. They asked it twice. Bipolar, bipolar. I'm sure one of them needed to be unipolar. Okay. Now, sometimes they're also named by the person's ego, the histologist, Dr. Purkinje. These are Purkinje fibers named after the histologist. And sometimes they're named by their appearance because this looks like a triangle or a pyramid. They're called pyramidal cells. Good place to take a break. When I come back, now that we finished the neuron, we'll talk about the neuroglial cells.